Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of The Suited Shootist. And this week I'm kind of picking up on an old video that I did back in 2020. I think it was one of the earlier videos that I did. I talked about managing known contacts. And, you know, it's a riff on the ShipWorks concept of managing unknown contacts, where you're having to do this very rapid identify friend or foe when there's somebody that is encroaching on you, to use their terminology. But I wanted to highlight this because there are real potentials in our lives where the people close to us can inadvertently create some problems, create some social friction, or, inadvertently skyline us to some degree. And it's worth talking about. I mean, the most obvious example is why I'm here in the first place. A fairly benign, offhanded comment by a coworker resulted in me getting called into HR and having myself and my personal effects searched and being discovered to be armed against company policy and all the ensuing consequences thereof. But let's look at some other kind of circumstances where this can also happen. A couple of years back, there was a podcast. I think it might have been the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus. I'll link to it down in the description. They had a few of us on, to include myself and Melody Lauer. And she talked about a circumstance where one of her kids was, talking about, Mom, I can see your gun, in public. I believe the circumstance was in a public restroom, so there was a certain modicum of visual privacy. But, again, it highlights the idea that there are people in our sphere, friends, family members, significant others, etc. If they know enough about you to know that you carry a firearm or that you train or any of this, if they're not about that life, they may not necessarily have the same understanding of what appropriate discretion is. And the example that I pointed to in the original video was one of my first corporate jobs when I first came to Houston. I didn't carry a firearm, but at that point, for whatever reason, I thought carrying a neck knife would be a good idea. And one of the recently graduated frat bros that was a coworker of mine, not going to call him a friend because he wasn't, was getting a little overly familiar and kind of horsing around, kind of give me one of those faux jabs to the chest. And he tapped the sheath. He was like, "What is it?" He started kind of poking at my chest. And, I was like, "Okay, yeah, it's a knife, no big deal." Well, fast forward a couple of weeks, and a few of us had gone out, grab a couple of drinks after work, and a mild altercation popped off at the bar where we were. It wasn't anything severe, like no cops got called. It was, your typical kind of, just posturing sort of deal. But this idiot goes, "Man, why did you get in there?" I just look at him and go, "You realize how stupid that sounds?" And, for all of us, we know how stupid that sounds. But to people that don't understand why we carry these defensive tools, it highlights the point that there are people in your life that either intentionally or just out of oblivion might end up volunteering you for something that you're not necessarily willing to get involved in. And the other part of it is that you also don't necessarily know exactly who knows what about you. When I put the video out about getting fired, there was a whole slew of comments of, "Well, that's why you don't talk about this stuff at work, and I'm not at work to make friends," and, a lot of other, quite frankly, antisocial commentary. And if you're able to be that solitary island of a person and literally just have no non-business interaction with anybody at the office, cool, do you. Everybody's wired differently. But social media is a thing as well. And unless you are very aggressively curating your presence online, it's possible that you may be broadcasting a little bit more information than you necessarily intend. And this is why this is important, because a friend of mine who prefers to remain nameless, for reasons that will soon become clear, ended up having to pick up a second job because, needed some extra cash for whatever reason. So he basically kind of took the Claude Werner challenge and, quote unquote, got a real job at one of the local big box retail stores. Well, he lives in a fairly small town. Turns out that one of the employees that was already there knew about my friend's activity and presence within the gun space. And literally within his first day of being hired, he gets called in with his supervisor in HR. They ask him about it. I mean, he doesn't deny anything. But then, oddly enough, he is subjected to an experience that was virtually identical to mine. He was asked to turn his pockets out, pull his pants up to expose his ankles, and show his waistline to prove that he wasn't carrying a firearm, simply because somebody else that happened to work there knew that he was a gun dude outside of work. And so it's critical, because you never really know who's watching, and you never really know who knows what. So that is why the concealment piece goes so far beyond just throwing a piece of fabric over a holstered pistol. And it's up to everybody to determine to what level they are going to live that concealed lifestyle. There are folks out there that post none of their firearms related activity on social media. Some of that is for privacy reasons. Some of that is because, the ever sort of tightening restrictions on community standards are making it very difficult for a lot of people, but that's its own discussion. But again, it's this catch-22, because if you never talk about it, if you never publicize it, there's some detrimental effect to that as well, because I have been in multiple positions to where I've had a positive impact on either like non-gun, gun agnostic, or very mildly anti-gun people in my world, because it's not something that I shy away from. It's not something that I hide. And they have felt comfortable approaching me with their questions, with their concerns, and knowing that they can actually engage in an intellectual discussion that is going to be had in good faith, and not just turn into this chanting of talking points where two parties end up just driving each other further into kind of their extreme corners of, belief. But again, it all goes back to managing known contacts. For your spouse, for your kids, things like that, people who are familiar with you on an intimate enough level that they know some of the details of your defensive habits. These are probably conversations worth having, because otherwise they might end up being had at very inopportune times. For the rest of it, think about it and actually have maybe some, to steal a term from John Farnham, tape loops in place, where if you've got people in your world that might either suspect or know some of your defense-related hobbies or interests, if there is an effective way to parry or downplay the comment or the inquiry, because the other side of it is if you get too defensive, or if you get too belligerent about it, that can come across as an overreaction that'll make somebody go, what the hell was that about? And then again, it'll start spurring that wheel of additional unwanted scrutiny. So bear in mind that it's not just the strangers, it's not just the encroaching unknown contact that has the potential to complicate things for us. The people within our sphere very much can as well. And that's not even getting into the fact that there's a very substantial percentage of violent crime that takes place between known parties. And I'm not talking about, the criminal gang violence or, drug wars and things like that. you've got domestic, you've got, so different kinds of family friction. It could be that something as almost trivial or benign as one of your shooting buddies maybe has a ne'er-do-well relative. And, they don't necessarily want to target their own family, but if they're hard enough up, they can start going through a friends list or a contact list and start looking for ways to get paid. So there's a lot of different ways that these things interlock, and it's very important for us to consider the multiple different ways that this can get complicated. And it's not all just about the gunfight, because the presence of the tools, the interest in these hobbies can sometimes be enough to create some issues. So I want you to think about that. And if you've had your own experiences that you're willing to share, please put that down in the comments as well, because it's critical that people talk about this. Otherwise, it gets dismissed as, oh, well, that shit never happens. And it does. And the more actual examples that we have to point to, the easier it is to kind of make that case. So if you want to, I'd really appreciate it. Put it down in the comments. Other than that, hope everybody has a fantastic week. Stay dangerous. Stay sharp.